smaller ones. Fifth, as I move on, the promised land also says that God will not clear all of the obstacles. Obstacles are like weights. They build character. They build strength. They build integrity. And remember, a problem that is not worth praying about is not worth worrying about. And yet we have so many problems. It is only in struggle that we are taught what our priorities are, that we are strengthened. Number 6, hurrying on. Possessing the promised land also says, strategize for victory. This preacher looks at the black community, and it troubles me in what condition we're in. The civil rights movement is at a crawl, if not altogether stalled. Our leadership is as fragmented as cooked spaghetti. One problem is this, and it's just me talking. We're still looking for another Martin. And Martins only show up once in a century. We need a consortium of leaders that will function like the Joint Chiefs of Staff and get some strategies together to work together to help our people and our nation. Quit fussing and fighting about who's going to be in charge. Reminds me of the episode of Gone with the Wind. The slaves were arguing over who was going to say quitting time. I says it's quitting time. No, I says it's quitting time. I want to shout, y'all both slaves. It don't make a difference. Who says it's quitting time? Your master tells you when it's quitting time. In other words, my brothers and sisters, don't get mad or jealous with somebody. Every spring, Ebony's 100 come out, and I wonder when they're going to get together. Because you must remember this, brothers and sisters. There's a difference in unity and uniformity. Unity says the parts work together for the whole. Just like your body is a unity, your car is a unity. It does not compete. The parts don't compete with each other. The carburetor doesn't fuss with the transmission. The tires don't argue with the steering wheel. And the same way with the body. We must go back to the 3 B's. First of all, the Bible. We need to start acting like saints and quit acting like we on Jerry Springer. And remember, the black church is to black people what the buffalo was to the Indian. Everything we had came out to church. Rock stars to politicians. We must go back to the sensible use of our dollars, the buck. In other words, we got to quit showing folk we got it. You know, you see, God ain't concerned about what you drive. He's concerned more so about what drives you. And we, especially in Shreveport, I want y'all to hear this, need to come off this merry-go-round of competing as far as consumer goods getting in debt to impress folk you don't like. If Joe Blow gets a car, I'll buy a bigger car. If Miss Ann buys a hat, I'll go buy a bigger hat and strut down the aisle in church late. Remember, my brothers and sisters, Racism is not dead. It has taken covert operation that acts like terrorists that seeks to destroy us on our journey. And then we must go back to the ballot. I remember Florida, every vote counts. Now, the system is still racist. Listen to the code words. I remember listening to Sam Alito's confirmation, and they use these terms: strict constructionists, don't legislate from the bench, read the Constitution as Washington and Madison and those boys wrote it. I said, wait a minute. That's an echo from Nixon and George Wallace. Because if you read the Constitution like they wrote it, I'd be a slave. Women could not vote. And Native Americans would have no rights. Now, moving on. And then, when you get to the promised land, you'll be tempted to forget who brought you to the promised land. When we get it made in the shade, there's a tendency to forget where we came from and the God who brought us here. If one is not careful, prosperity will give him a good case of amnesia, causing us to forget the God of our salvation. There are many who want to make God like a spare tire, but God wants to be the steering wheel. You see, we must keep our focus on Christ. So as I hurry to a close, let us struggle to take the promised land. Let us remember, and I want to serve notice on the pundits, liberation theology is not Marxist. It's rooted in the heart of God. That God heard the cry of Israel in the Old Testament and pitched his tent in Jesus in the New Testament. He came to see about the 4 L's, the lost, the least, the leftovers, and the left outs. Keep on marching to the promised land. But remember, there are some idols in the promised land. The first idol is materialism that judges people by what they have and not by who they are. We judge them by what they have on the outside instead of who they are and where on the inside. But then, I must tell you, there are 2 idols on the political landscape. One is conservatism. They are those who made a religion out of conservatism. Conservatism deifies the individual to the point you miss out on the group. Conservatism is to the point that many talk show commentators, beloveds, will ignore the still small voice. They tell you, well, what would Reagan do? When they ought to ask you, what would Jesus do? Conservatives take the posture of the Levite and the priest on the Jericho road. No, you didn't own slaves, but you're obligated to do something about the problem. Dr. King said what sent Dives to hell was not what he did, but what he didn't do. Conservatives have a religion. Their apostles are Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, instead of Peter, James, and John and the rest. Their gods are not Jehovah. Their gods are Ronald Reagan and George Bush. Conservatism, yes, reminds us what's great about America. But conservatism forgets, just as God judged the Chinese and will judge the Russians and will judge the Nazis, he will judge America for how she treats the poor and the despised. Conservatism, then, beloveds, says make your own way. But then there's another God, the God of liberalism, which is at the other extreme. Liberalism run amok will make people lazy. It'll make them be like the man at the pool of Bethesda who got comfortable in his sickness. Liberalism does run amok. And as a result, we have morals that make a dog seem clean. And then, beloveds, one perspective that liberals and conservatives miss. God does not come from a blue state. God does not come from a red state. If anything, he comes from a purple state. Because when you look at blue, it stands for divinity. Red stands for humanity. When you put purple, red and blue together, you get purple. And then there is the God of militarism that puts its trust in arms instead of the Almighty. But then, as I hurry on to a close, there's another God. It's called racism. Racism gives its people, its proponents, a false sense of superiority. I'm sad to say that racism is in America's DNA. Racism was in our DNA. It is seen at the Constitutional Convention when they called us 3/5 of a person. And we've been fighting for the 2/5 ever since. It's heard by Roger Taney in the Dred Scott decision when he said people of color have no rights that a white man needs to respect. We see racism spill blood at Vicksburg, Gettysburg, and Antietam as America was punished for the sin of slavery. Racism, I tell you, is in America's DNA. It's caused church folk to put on choir robes on Sunday and white robes the rest of the week. Racism is what Billie Holiday described in her song Strange Fruit. Yes, racism is in America's DNA. But I stopped by to tell you there's a cure for racism. And I see it in what I call stem cell research. You see, I ain't talking about physical stem cells. I'm talking about spiritual stem cells. When I read the prophets, I see one who's a stem, a branch. Isaiah says, yes, that he grew up as a tender branch. Isaiah said he's the root of Jesse. Isaiah said he's the root in dry ground. Isaiah says he gives stem cell transplants. But I stopped by to tell you, you can't get it at LSU. You can't get it at Shepherd. You can't get it at Willis-Knighton. But you get it at Calvary. Well, I got to close now. So remember that Jesus is our Joshua. He's the one that leads us on our journey. He's the one that heard us in the cotton fields. He's the one that got on the back of the bus with us. He's the one that dried our tears when our sons and daughters were lynched. He's the one that has his hand on us. He's the one, I tell you, that'll bring us through. Can I get a witness? He brings us through suffering